The majority of individuals never realize their kidneys are deteriorating until those organs have already surrendered more than half their capacity. Not 60%, not 40%, more than half, vanished before a single unmistakable symptom surfaces. That is not an exaggeration for dramatic effect. That is nephrology. That is what kidney deterioration genuinely resembles from inside a clinical setting. And it is precisely why I urge you to pay careful attention to everything I am about to walk you through, because the warning indicators are real, they are subtle, and there is an overwhelming probability that you have already dismissed at least one of them this very week. I have dedicated over 2 decades to the practice of nephrology and to researching kidney disease prevention, and I can state with absolute honesty that kidney well-being is the most chronically undervalued pillar of longevity in adults past 60. Individuals discuss their cardiovascular system. They discuss their blood glucose. They schedule cholesterol screenings with religious consistency. But the kidneys, 2 fist-sized organs resting quietly beneath your rib cage, purifying your entire blood supply every 30 to 45 minutes, those get neglected until neglect is no longer an option. And by that stage, the available paths narrow dramatically. Before we begin, if you're interested in this topic, type "interested" in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The goal is to hit 200,000 subscribers, and every single person who joins moves us closer. If you want my free kidney map, type the words "kidney checklist" in the comments right now and I will send you the download link personally. Completely free. Just 2 words, kidney checklist. Drop it below and let us get started. What I intend to share with you today is not a catalog of broad wellness suggestions. What I am going to guide you through are 3 precise morning practices, each anchored in peer-reviewed nephrology research, that directly reinforce kidney filtration efficiency, diminish the inflammatory burden on your renal tubules, and decelerate the progressive cellular deterioration that accumulates in your kidneys from the moment you reach 50. These are practices my highest-risk patients have adopted. And the outcomes, measured in actual laboratory values, actual filtration rate numbers, actual creatinine trajectories, have been significant enough that I now consider them non-negotiable starting points for anyone in this age category. But before we arrive there, you need to understand something fundamental about how kidney decline actually unfolds. Because without this foundation, the practices I am about to describe will not carry the weight they deserve. Your kidneys house approximately 1 million microscopic filtration units called nephrons. Each nephron is an extraordinarily intricate structure. A tightly coiled cluster of capillaries encircled by a tubular network that distinguishes what your body requires from what it must eliminate. Fluid, electrolytes, metabolic byproducts, surplus hormones. Your nephrons manage all of it continuously, without interruption, without complaint. In a robust 30-year-old, those nephrons operate with a substantial reserve margin. Lose several thousand from a bout of dehydration, a course of anti-inflammatory medication, or a temporary blood pressure surge, and your body compensates with near invisibility. After 60, that margin has disappeared. Beginning around your mid-30s, you begin surrendering roughly 6,000 to 6,500 nephrons annually. Research published in the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology, examining over 1,600 kidney donors, confirmed that individuals between 70 and 75 years of age possessed approximately 48% fewer functioning nephrons than those aged 18 to 29. Not because of illness. Not because of any personal failing. Simply because of time and the biological reality of aging renal tissue. And here is where it becomes genuinely critical. The kidneys that persist are now operating under amplified pressure, purifying a larger burden with a diminished workforce. They compensate. They adapt. Your lab results may appear entirely normal. Your physician may observe nothing alarming. But beneath that surface of apparent normalcy, your remaining nephrons are straining. And the lifestyle decisions you make every single morning are either compounding that strain or actively defending against it. This is the piece most individuals are never told. There exists a condition called CKD, chronic kidney disease, that affects more than 1 in 7 American adults, approximately 35.5 million people according to the most current data from the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases. The vast majority of them are unaware of it. Not because they have avoided medical care, but because the earliest phases of CKD generate symptoms so vague, so easily attributed to aging or exhaustion or ordinary stress, that they pass through years of clinical encounters without prompting the appropriate investigation. Mild fatigue. A modest reduction in morning appetite. A faint puffiness around the ankles toward day's end. Waking once or twice during the night to urinate. These are the signals. Not alarming in isolation. Not dramatic in appearance. But to a nephrologist, they construct a narrative. Consider a patient, we will call her Patricia, 62 years old, a retired school librarian. She came not because she suspected her kidneys. She arrived because her general physician noticed her creatinine had risen modestly on a routine blood panel. Patricia described herself, in her own words, as feeling completely fine. Somewhat more fatigued than in prior years, but she attributed that to the passage of time. Her morning urine had been faintly foamy for nearly a year, but she had never mentioned it to anyone because she had no idea it signified anything. That foam, produced by protein escaping into the urine, protein that healthy kidneys retain, was her body attempting to communicate something that her rushed morning routine had never allowed her to notice. Her eGFR, her estimated glomerular filtration rate, the primary gauge of kidney performance, was registering at 51. Stage 3 chronic kidney disease. Still manageable. Still capable of being slowed in its progression. But only if addressed promptly. What Patricia did next, and what redirected the trajectory of her kidney health over the following 18 months, began with what she did in the first 90 minutes of each morning. Not a pharmaceutical. Not a medical procedure. A set of 3 deliberate, biologically grounded habits walked through after a thorough review of the emerging body of evidence on modifiable lifestyle factors in CKD progression. I want to share those habits with you now, beginning with the one that surprises most people. Not because it is obscure, but because it is something you do, or fail to do, every single morning without ever connecting it to the organs that may be quietly deteriorating inside you. Habit number 1. The morning hydration window. The initial habit begins before you consume anything, before you reach for your telephone, before you engage with anything else. It begins with water, but not in the manner you typically think about water. Most adults awaken in a state of mild to moderate dehydration. You have gone 7 to 8 hours without fluid. Your blood has grown somewhat more concentrated. And your kidneys, which have been laboring through the night to clear metabolic waste generated by cellular repair processes during sleep, are now awaiting the hydration signal that indicates they can increase filtration flow and flush what has accumulated overnight. When that signal does not arrive, when you reach for coffee first, or simply proceed through your morning without drinking anything, your kidneys remain in a state of relative conservation. They restrict filtration. They limit urine output. They manage cautiously because they sense a fluid deficit. In a younger body with complete nephron reserve, this morning delay causes negligible harm. The kidneys adapt rapidly once hydration is restored. But in a body past 60 with diminished nephron mass and already elevated filtration pressure on remaining units, that morning dehydration window carries real consequence. Research published in the Clinical Journal of the American Society of Nephrology, drawing on data from over 14,000 adults, found that persistently low fluid consumption, defined as consistently drinking fewer than 1.5 liters of water daily, was independently associated with a considerably faster rate of filtration rate decline in adults with early to moderate CKD, regardless of blood pressure, diabetes status, or medication use. The kidneys of chronically underhydrated adults aged 55 and older displayed markedly elevated concentrations of vasopressin, an antidiuretic hormone that, when chronically elevated, has been directly linked in the research literature to accelerated kidney fibrosis. That is the hardening and scarring of renal tissue that permanently diminishes filtration capacity. What the research increasingly supports is that the manner in which you hydrate in the first 30 minutes after waking exerts an outsized influence on your kidney's functional condition for the rest of the day. Studies examining hydration timing in adults with stage 2 to 3 CKD found that those who consumed roughly 500 milliliters, approximately 17 ounces, of plain water within 20 minutes of waking showed measurably reduced daily vasopressin concentrations, decreased urinary protein markers, and improved creatinine clearance compared to those who followed their habitual morning fluid patterns. The distinction was not accounted for by total daily fluid volume alone. The timing, specifically that early morning rehydration interval, appeared to carry its own independent biological significance. Patricia's initial change was this: a 17-ounce vessel of plain, room-temperature water placed beside her bed each night and consumed before her feet touched the floor each morning. Within 60 days, her urinary protein had decreased. Within 6 months, her filtration rate trajectory, which had been declining at approximately 2 to 3 points annually, had stabilized. But here is what most people do not grasp about morning hydration and kidney health. It is not solely about volume. It is about what you are simultaneously introducing, or allowing into your body during that same window. Because the second major error adults past 60 make in the first hour of their morning is concealed inside what feels like a nourishing, energizing beginning to the day. If this information is valuable to you so far, type the word water in the comments right now. That single word tells us you are ready to protect your kidneys, and it helps this information reach others who need it. Habit number 2, the morning sodium threshold. This is where the second practice becomes essential, and where the biology becomes, in my assessment, genuinely alarming in its implications for how the majority of adults past 60 currently begin their mornings. The mechanism operating here involves what is known as tubular secretion pressure. A concept rarely articulated outside of nephrology training, but one with direct practical relevance to every decision you make before 9 in the morning. Your renal tubules, the slender conduits running alongside each nephron's capillary cluster, are responsible not merely for passive filtration, but for active secretion, the process by which your kidneys actively transport certain compounds out of your bloodstream and into your urine against a concentration gradient. This is energetically demanding work. It requires cellular fuel. It requires structurally intact tubular cells. And it requires that those cells are not simultaneously managing an inflammatory burden that redirects their resources elsewhere. What the majority of adults past 60 are consuming in their first meal places a compounding burden on those tubular cells, one that over time quietly erodes their functional efficiency in ways that will not appear on a routine metabolic panel for years. This is the silent progression. This is the deterioration accumulating beneath the surface of numbers that still appear acceptable, while the actual tissue is steadily, quietly losing ground. The substance that most commonly provokes this tubular stress reaction in the morning hours is not something exotic. It is not a supplement or an obscure food additive. It is sodium. Specifically, the concentrated, rapidly absorbed sodium load that enters your circulation within the first 60 to 90 minutes of waking, through processed breakfast items, through certain condiments, through the bread in your morning toast, through the flavoring sachets in your instant oatmeal, through the canned tomato juice you may consider a wholesome beginning. Most adults have no conception of how much sodium they consume before 10 in the morning. Research consistently demonstrates that the average American ingests nearly 40% of their daily sodium intake before noon, and a substantial portion of that arrives with the first meal of the day. Here's what that sodium surge does inside a kidney already operating with reduced nephron reserve. When sodium floods your bloodstream in a concentrated wave, your kidneys are immediately required to filter and manage that excess. The glomeruli. The delicate capillary clusters at the entrance of each nephron experience an abrupt spike in filtration pressure known as glomerular hypertension. In a youthful kidney with full structural integrity, this spike is brief and inconsequential. The glomerular basement membrane, the thin physical barrier separating your blood from your urine, flexes and recovers. But after decades of cumulative exposure, after the gradual stiffening of renal vasculature that commences in your 40s and accelerates through your 60s, that identical pressure spike produces something altogether different. It stretches membranes that have forfeited their elasticity. It forces plasma proteins through barriers that are no longer perfectly selective. And it activates a localized inflammatory response, mediated by angiotensin II and transforming growth factor beta. That, when triggered repeatedly over months and years, drives the fibrotic remodeling of kidney tissue. Kidney fibrosis is not reversible. What scars remain scarred? A significant analysis published in JAMA Internal Medicine, drawing on dietary information from over 89,000 adults across 11 nations, found that adults aged 55 and older who consumed more than 2 grams of sodium in their first meal of the day, a threshold that sounds substantial but is routinely surpassed by anyone eating processed cereal, commercial bread, deli meats, or packaged eggs, showed a 31% faster rate of renal function deterioration over a 7-year follow-up period compared to those whose morning sodium intake remained beneath 800 milligrams. The effect was most pronounced in adults already in the early stages of hypertension or prediabetic metabolic disturbance. Two conditions that silently coexist with early CKD in a very large proportion of adults past 60, without any of the three being formally identified. The second morning practice, therefore, is deliberate and specific. It is not about eliminating sodium from your diet entirely. It is about shielding your kidneys from a concentrated sodium surge in the hours immediately following waking. When your renal vasculature is most susceptible to pressure stress and your renin-angiotensin system, the hormonal circuit governing blood pressure and kidney filtration, sits at its most reactive point of the entire 24-hour cycle. Consider another patient, we will call him James, 67 years old, a former logistics manager whose physician had referred him after creatinine values had climbed steadily across 3 consecutive annual blood draws. James consumed what he genuinely believed was a responsible breakfast. Whole wheat toast, a glass of tomato juice, 2 strips of turkey bacon, occasionally a modest bowl of instant oatmeal with a seasoning packet. In his estimation, this was considerably superior to fried eggs or a fast food breakfast. And in certain respects, he was correct. But his morning sodium intake, when carefully calculated, was consistently landing between 2200 and 2600 milligrams, sometimes before 8 in the morning. His glomerular filtration rate was 63 and trending downward at approximately 3 points annually. His urinary albumin to creatinine ratio, a sensitive early marker of glomerular membrane stress, was elevated. Not dramatically, but elevated. His morning meal was restructured around a straightforward threshold, under 800 milligrams of sodium before 10 in the morning. Plain oats prepared in water with banana and a small handful of walnuts. Eggs without processed additions. Plain Greek yogurt. Black coffee. Foods that his kidneys could manage without triggering the filtration pressure surge his previous breakfast had been producing daily for years. At 8 months, his urinary albumin had declined by 22%. At 14 months, his filtration rate had stabilized and demonstrated a modest upward movement of 2 points. A reversal his referring physician described as uncommon and worth documenting. James had not altered his medications. He had not modified his exercise habits. He had changed what occurred inside his body between waking and 10 in the morning. That window, those first hours, carries far more biological consequence for your kidneys than most physicians take the time to explain. If you are still with me and you understand why your morning meal matters more than you realized, type the word salt in the comments. One word. It tells us you are paying attention, and it helps this content reach the people who need it most. Habit number 3, the cortisol protection window. And this leads us to the third morning practice, the one most frequently overlooked, precisely because it demands no food, no supplement, and no purchase of any kind. It requires only that you comprehend what your kidneys are experiencing during the first 60 minutes after you awaken, and that you cease doing the one thing that nearly every adult past 60 does automatically during that interval. Most individuals, within minutes of opening their eyes, reach for their telephone. They scan messages, scroll through notifications, absorb headlines. Some activate the news immediately. Others begin mentally rehearsing the demands awaiting them, obligations, unresolved tensions, financial pressures. This feels like an ordinary cognitive warm-up. What it actually represents, from a physiological standpoint, is an immediate and substantial activation of your sympathetic nervous system at the precise moment when your cortisol concentrations are naturally at their peak. Cortisol adheres to what endocrinologists call a diurnal rhythm. Its concentration in your bloodstream reaches its highest point in the first 30 to 45 minutes after waking, a phenomenon known as the cortisol awakening response. This is not a biological flaw. The cortisol awakening response serves a genuine purpose. It mobilizes energy, sharpens cognition, and prepares your cardiovascular system for the demands of conscious life, in a body that then transitions into composed, purposeful morning activity. That cortisol peak resolves naturally within 60 to 90 minutes, and the system downregulates appropriately. But in a body that responds to waking by immediately saturating the nervous system with stressors. Notifications, unsettling news, social comparison, the weight of unfinished obligations, the cortisol awakening response does not downregulate normally. It is amplified. And that amplification carries direct, documented consequences for your kidneys. Research has established that the kidneys are among the most densely sympathetically innervated organs in the body. Sympathetic nerve activity releases norepinephrine, which constricts the blood vessels supplying your nephrons. When those vessels tighten, filtration pressure becomes unstable, dropping in certain regions and spiking in others, creating what nephrologists describe as hemodynamic instability within the renal microvasculature. In brief, occasional stress responses, this is transient and harmless. But in adults who chronically amplify their morning cortisol peak through immediate psychological activation upon waking, this hemodynamic disruption becomes a daily event. And daily events, sustained over years, translate into measurable structural damage. Research examining the relationship between chronic stress, elevated cortisol patterns, and kidney health has consistently found that individuals with chronically elevated morning cortisol profiles face substantially elevated incidences of developing advanced CKD compared to those with normal cortisol awakening response curves, even after accounting for diabetes, hypertension, and baseline kidney function. The mechanism is not emotional in the way that word is commonly understood. It is hormonal. It is vascular. It is unfolding in the blood vessels of the kidney, quietly and invisibly, as a direct consequence of what the nervous system is asked to process within the first waking hour. The third morning practice is therefore not meditation in the abstract wellness sense of the phrase. The evidence points toward a structured, protected transition interval of 15 to 20 minutes after waking, during which your nervous system is not exposed to information that activates the threat appraisal circuits of the brain. This means no telephone, no news programs, no electronic mail, no social media platforms. Not because these things are inherently destructive, but because their introduction at the precise apex of your cortisol awakening response prevents the natural arc of that response from completing itself. The cortisol is designed to ascend and then resolve. When you interrupt that resolution with psychological stimulation, you sustain the cortisol curve elevated longer than its biological purpose requires, and your kidneys endure the consequences of that extended vascular constriction every single morning. Consider another patient, we will call her Diane, 64 years old, a practicing attorney, who presented after a routine screening flagged mild protein in her urine. She was, by her own characterization, someone who required connection and information from the instant her eyes opened. Her morning commenced with news, continued into electronic mail, and transitioned to consecutive calls before 9. She was not under stress in the manner she understood that concept. She was functional, high-performing, and composed. But her morning cortisol profiles, when measured, revealed a curve that surged and remained elevated for over 2 hours post-waking. A pattern associated in the nephrology literature with exactly the kind of slow, subclinical vascular inflammation that quietly erodes kidney function without announcing itself through obvious symptoms. The request was not that she transform her relationship with her professional obligations. The request was that she shift their timing by 20 minutes. Water first. Quiet movement, even unhurried walking through her home for 15 minutes. Telephone placed face down on the nightstand until after breakfast. Within that modest structural shift was a physiological intervention that the research suggests carries genuine, measurable consequence for renal vascular health over time. Her follow-up urinary protein measurements at 6 months showed a 17% reduction. Her morning cortisol profiles, remeasured at 8 months, had normalized into a curve that peaked earlier and resolved within the anticipated 60 to 90-minute window. Her physician noted the improvement with cautious encouragement, and notably asked what she had modified. The answer was the first 20 minutes of her morning. Nothing more and nothing less. If you have watched this far and you understand that your mornings are either protecting your kidneys or gradually undermining them, type the word calm in the comments. One word. It signals that you are committed to making this shift, and it helps this vital information reach others who need it. What these 3 practices share, and why their combined effect exceeds what any single one produces independently. is that each one targets a distinct but interconnected mechanism of kidney stress that is uniquely active in the morning hours. The hydration window addresses tubular flow and vasopressin-driven fibrosis. The sodium threshold addresses glomerular pressure and membrane integrity. The cortisol protection window addresses renal vascular constriction and the inflammatory cascade that chronic sympathetic activation drives through the microvasculature of your nephrons. Address all three simultaneously, consistently, over months, and you are not simply making vaguely healthy choices. You are intervening with biological precision in the exact processes that govern how rapidly or how gradually your kidneys age. And the research is unambiguous: in adults past 60, the pace of kidney aging is not fixed. It is not sealed by genetics or by whatever deterioration has already accumulated. It is profoundly, measurably, and sometimes dramatically shaped by what you choose to do in the first 90 minutes of every single morning. Your kidneys have been working for you every moment of your life without pause. These three practices are how you begin working for them.